well, welcome everybody. I thought if we did introductions ourselves, that will help me enormously, because I'm not quite sure how many are on the call, but if we just introduce ourselves, and then we can go into some of the poll questions that people have put in. So my name is Mark Traherne. I've been sort of chairing some of the other sessions, and my background was a really large pharma at Pfizer, and then been involved in a number of smaller businesses. And I'm here today representing Monument Therapeutics, which is a digital biomarkers company. And I'm trying to do as little talking as possible to allow the panel to do most of the talking. So maybe if the panel sort of volunteer and introduce themselves, and then we can go into the questions, if that would be helpful. Thank you. So maybe, oh, hang on. I'm just trying to see. Dennis, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mark. And it's good to see some faces finally. Usually, during presentation, you only see the speaker and nobody from the audience. But I'm glad to be in this panel discussion. At least have some sort of or feeling of interactions. And about myself, I'm head of clinical operations currently at Noscom. Noscom is a biotechnology company with offices in Switzerland and lab and production facilities in Rome in Italy. And we are now in the phase 1, phase 2. And so far I've been working for big pharma and also for medium-sized CROs in regions as a head of clinical operations and as a manager in pharma. But I've been in the clinical operations for more than 20 years.
Excellent. Welcome. I think I've seen Anzar Abbas a bit earlier on one of the things. So if you could maybe introduce yourselves for those who weren't at your talk this morning. Anzar, are you there?
I'm back.
Oh, thank you. Can you maybe do an introduction, if that's okay?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Anzar Abbas. I'm a neuroscientist by background. I'm a director of digital solutions at Cambridge Cognition. I'm very happy to be here and be part of the discussion.
Very good, thank you. And Domenico, people may have just been at your talk just recently, but if they weren't, could you maybe do another reintroduction, please? Thank you.
Yes, hello, everybody. Am I okay?
Very loud and clear, thank you.
Okay, good. I'm Nico Mirante. So I have been 27 years in global clinical development, work in several organizations across regions, and I'm very pleased with the organizing. Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity to be in this panel. I look forward to the discussion. My background is diabetes endocrinology. I come from Pisa University. I spent all my studies in Italy and worked abroad in UK, particularly Italy, US, and Switzerland.
Excellent, thank you. And I can also see Sebastian on the call as well. If you could maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the invitation for the panel. Yeah, my name is Sebastian Freund. I'm a radiobiologist by background, and now I'm working for Eli Lilly in Germany as a medical science liaison manager with a focus on oncology.
Thank you very much. Sam, I can't see everybody's face at the moment because I've just got a strip of people. Who have I missed and should be asking to introduce themselves?
I believe Dr. Mercy.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I can just see now. Yeah.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting conference and panel. I'm Mircea Ciucă. I'm a physician by training. I work in drug safety since many years. I work in CROs, small companies, big companies with all kinds of products, and I'm here to listen to the best in the field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have I covered everybody who's on the panel now? Sam?
Yes, you have.
Very good. Right. So going to questions now. These ones that came in through, and then I'll just ask people to volunteer. So the poll questions are. Well, I guess we've had a lot of conversation about this in the earlier, but has COVID-19 impacted your ability to conduct your clinical trials? I'm going to assume the answer is yes, but actually it'd be quite helpful if you did say yes, how that happened to you, maybe a case study, And interestingly, if you say no, that's an even more interesting answer. But if I just sort of open the floor to somebody to volunteer to take that question forward, has COVID-19 impacted your ability to conduct your clinical trials?
If you want, Mark, I can do it a quick start to it. So,
perfect.
Of course, in safety, we have been among the first one to be the safety of our patients in our studies during the pandemic. And you have seen there was not only a request coming internally from internal stakeholders, but also authorities. They were mandating sponsors of clinical trials to look at the impact of the pandemic and to continuously assess the benefit risk of the patients participating in the studies. So I think that was the first impact. But on the other hand, also we have been asked to design risk mitigation strategies for studies looking for treatments for COVID-19. So that was a dual role to look upon patients in our ongoing trials with other medicines or other indications, but also to quickly organize in a safe manner studies looking at COVID-19.
Okay, that's been really helpful. Thank you. And maybe some of the other panel members who haven't spoken earlier, I mean, maybe Sebastian, have you, obviously oncology, I imagine, has been affected, and maybe some examples that have affected you and your work at Lilly?
Absolutely, yes. In Germany, when the lockdown starts, we recognize the drop of the patient numbers in our studies, which was then stabilized later on when the teams switched to remote solutions. But right now they are still not on the same level than before the COVID-19 pandemic. So they are still, compared to the plans, there are still patients missing in the trials. So from this side, it was of course it affected the trials, but on the other hand, which affected me in person, as I'm from the medical department in Lilly, we've got a chance to support the clinical operations team in their now remote feasibility visits, which is pretty nice to get connected to all the study sites. And so it was not all that bad. There are some positive aspects in the pandemic.
Very good. And is it, sorry, I don't know if it's Dennis or Denny, which I should say is the most appropriate pronunciation, but maybe you could correct my pronunciation and then give us your views.
Dennis is just fine. Thanks. Single N, but you can pronounce it with as it was double N. But So yeah, of course, absolutely. I mean, being in a small biotech with a phase 1 study in the middle of COVID, it wasn't easy for us, that's for sure. And our ability to conduct studies was really affected, most of all because of enrollment projections. Like everywhere else, this was highly affected. And, you know, especially in the phase 1, where you have a small population or small sample size, you really see the effect of it. And then you can see the effect in the supply plan. You can see the effect with the vendors, all sorts of issues and problems all over. And we were really affected for a certain period of time. And after all, once we applied all the measures and once we grouped, as this was new scenario for all of us. I mean, once is having a backup or mitigation procedure in theory, but now when the COVID came, it became a real scenario, or you have to provide your own measures and put it in practice. So yeah, we were highly affected, and we are now luckily out of all this effect, and we are now waiting for the second wave, but hopefully better prepared this time.
Excellent. Well, it's good to hear people are, turning the corner and coming out of this. I guess as a sort of service provider, if I may call you that, Anzar, at Cambridge Cognition, have you had a good pandemic or a bad pandemic, or has it been, if there is such a thing as a good pandemic, have you had one now of Cambridge Cognition?
It's definitely a question if there's such a thing as a good pandemic. But I want to try and answer your question of how has it affected our ability to conduct clinical trials. Obviously the answer is yes. It's affected all of us in our ability, and the shock of it in itself has been very impactful. But to be honest, apart from the very obvious ways that the others have mentioned and how the pandemic's affected clinical studies and that patient enrollment's hard, in-person visits are difficult, and everything else. As a vendor for a tool that allows for digital measurement of health, in that sense, it actually hasn't for us, because if you think about it, the whole point of our technology is to allow for a digitized assessment of cognition. What is traditionally required to be done on a paper and pencil or in person, or can now be done using an iPad or on the web or using smartphones. So for us, the impact isn't in that our technology became sort of more difficult to implement. It actually became much more relevant. And that was a little bit more of the difficulties. Now we're thinking about sort of how can we hone and adjust the technology to best support the remote studies. It actually allows us to put our tech, which is already in a good position to support decentralized studies or remote sort of measurement. It allows us the opportunity to really have to deliver on that, and hence improve the tech in some ways to support these kinds of studies. So for a provider of a digital assessment, the pandemic in some ways has been good to turn a lot of the attention to these kinds of tools, where we've for years been sort of demonstrating the usefulness and the value of remote measurement. In the context of pandemic, it actually became relevant just in general, and so that in that sense, it's been positive to help put these technologies in a better position. And I think as we're going back to run clinical trials a bit more sort of the regular way, I hope that we continue to sort of appreciate the value that the digital tools have brought over the course of the last couple of years, to continue using and utilizing them to improve the patient experience, make things easier for sites, etc. I think you're muted.
Dr. Mark, I think you're muted.
Trying to read and speak at the same time, which is always dangerous. So the other couple of questions I think you sort of answered from Cambridge Cognition's perspective, but it'd be good to hear from others. And I'll roll these into one question because they're linked. Is have you adopted new software procedures to support monitoring of decentralized trials? And two, will you continue to use these decentralized methods in the post-COVID world? So I guess the answer from Cambridge Cognition is yes, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what you just said, I think. But maybe some of the other larger companies and some maybe could answer those questions about how it's affected them.
So for me, I think we will have more remote visits, I will call it. I think that works later on pretty fine. And to be honest, the IT equipment in some clinics are pretty old, which was a bit difficult at the beginning. But now I think everybody is on the latest technology, and the company will go on with web meetings or whatever. It's a lot, or it saves a lot of times mostly, and that's a really good point.
Anyone else wish to comment? Dennis or Domenico or anyone else who's on the call?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think, and generally speaking, it's been helpful, making the argument for digital assessment or digital measurement for several years. That conversation actually became a lot easier, where 2 years ago, it would have been an actual conversation to sit down and talk to a sponsor about, hey, I think you should use remote visits or digital assessments. And this is why, patients take them at home. It can lead to some sort of more sensitive or objective measurements that are calculated using this kind of tech. There was an initial conversation to just try to convince somebody the value of such an assessment, and then it's a further conversation of, okay, what does it look like? How do we deploy it, and all the logistics of it? I think one way in which the pandemic's affected the way we deploy these studies, and that initial conversation has actually become sort of a given at this point. Everybody realizes and understands and appreciates the importance of being able to conduct these visits remotely or measure some aspect of health remotely. So now the conversation has turned more to, okay, how do we do that the best way possible, rather than should we do that at all?
Yeah, no, good point. And maybe if Dennis and then Domenico and then everyone else comments, and what their views have been.
Yes, I mean, my comment is that digital technology is paramount. So, and it's important more than ever now because the pandemic, it was turning very important even before the pandemic. So we have really appreciated the importance of, digital technology and remote monitoring even before. So it's not just due to the pandemic, this consideration, but it's even more pronounced now because of the pandemic. But I would also like to remind here that there are some elements of face-to-face visits, visits of patients at the site that cannot be avoided. So I have to say, there are, we want to be very careful on patient safety. We want to capture, the reporting of adverse events from the patient themselves. We don't want to miss that up just because of remote monitoring or just because, this is a big struggle. We need also to see, to get a balance and trying to also bring patients back to the clinic because they also need to be seen by the physicians. They also need to be looked after, during clinical studies and in clinical care. So we can't just delegate everything remotely. It wouldn't work. In a clinical setting, it doesn't work in clinical practice, and we know that. We heard this also from physicians. They need to see patients as much as that is feasible, let's say, but make sure that we don't lose the grip with patients. They don't lose their grip. They keep seeing patients, and they can have a good interaction. So it's a balanced approach. So it can be an extreme one way or the other.
Excellent. Any more comments on that before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I would agree with Nico, and my thoughts were exactly the same 2 years ago, because I thought it's really impossible to have a fully decentralized clinical trial or fully remote monitoring model. And usually you have remote monitoring visits or remote monitoring models just as an option in every clinical monitoring plan. But when the COVID started, then this became an only option. And I have to admit that whatever I thought before, now I see that I was wrong, because now I see that I can perform fully remote monitoring. I mean, it's still a struggle and it's still a challenge and it's difficult, but it can be done and the results can be achieved. For the decentralized part, which you brought up also, Nico, I'm not that sure it would work fully, but partially, I believe we are going all in that direction.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. But we need to also streamline our study designs, right? We need to make sure, we need to become a little bit more effective, efficient in the way we design the studies. Why patient centrism is so relevant. This pandemic has given us the opportunity to reconsider all that paradigm and to make our studies more feasible, closer to the real practice, not abstract and just for the sake of trying to get these medicines approved. It's much more than that. So we need to also consider all this.
I think there's another question that's come through, which is sort of more of a difficult one because everyone will have to make a choice. So I'm going to ask each panel member, and the question is, which is the one long-lasting change that's happened during pandemic that you think will endure? And you can only choose one, so that's going to be quite difficult. But maybe we'll go through each panel member in turn. Maybe Domenico, as you're already there, if you had to choose one thing, what would it be that will endure after this pandemic?
So one positive consideration. This is the question. It's about positive consideration. So what has been?
I think it's good. If you really want, you could choose one positive and one negative. But I think it's a question.
Yes. So in one positive is the time that we all had to be impacted and we all had to stop. doing routinely what we used to do before. So we had more time to reflect and to consider opportunities the pandemic, tragically has been giving us, in terms of how we can reconsider this journey with patients, how can be more focused on patients, how can we make patients more relevant to what we do on our daily work. So I see this as a very positive thought. A negative thought, obviously, is the fact that the financial constraints some companies had to put in place, and the fact that many of our studies have been heavily impacted. So obviously that is a challenge, and obviously it was in some situations impossible to overcome. So it was a realistic, a kind of warning sign, and we do put some of us, or many working colleagues, are also at risk of losing their job, or not being able to continue with the work we do. So it's a mixed balance, I would say, but definitely keep positive for the future.
You're on mute.
Technology soon. So Dennis, maybe if you were happy to pick one or two, if you can go on both.
Sure. I will not make a selection, but I will put it in different words. So once you face a natural disaster like a flood or something, then probably next time you would be prepared and you would do whatever you can to avoid all impact of flood that you had. And the similar thing happened here. We all have our mitigation plans in our SOPs, backup plans, strategies, but I don't think that anybody was prepared for this one. And if I can say something about what would I do for future, is that all business continuity plans must be in place, and then they must be doable in practice. The same goes for all mitigation strategies. Now everybody is talking about COVID, so you can find tons of materials to see what measures or what tools or what actions you can apply for the next COVID wave or for the next similar scenario, and you have to just adapt it to your individual needs of your company or program or a study. There are so many tools out there, but what you must have plan which are doable in practice, and you must be now prepared, because next time you cannot excuse yourself that, we didn't know about this and we were not prepared.
Thank you. And that, in terms of one thing that you're not specifically, but more
I think I'll reiterate what I was saying. It's been nice to see more of an open-mindedness towards digital assessment and the movement that's happened towards that. I'll reiterate what was said before. It'll be nice to be perhaps a better prepared next time. Hopefully there won't be a next time, but to have those kinds of plans in place is important. And I think apart from just the clinical trials themselves, in our jobs and our daily lives, like the fact that we're doing this remotely, and a lot of business development efforts and conferences and stuff that have gotten remote is sometimes really nice because we can do this from our living rooms, but other times a bit unfortunate in that we can't be having a panel discussion like this in person. And a lot of the interesting discussions and innovations and ideas that come about are often in those kinds of settings. So it'll be nice to go back to having these sort of meetings in person as well. Just in terms of how it's affected our day-to-day business to run these and plan these studies.
Sebastian, have you got a thought or thoughts? Sebastian, did you hear me okay, or can you hear me okay?
Yeah, now I can hear you. So it's the same here. What was really positive was less travel, much more work from home. But as my colleagues mentioned, it's sometimes really time consuming to fix small issues in, I don't know, 200 emails, which can be a 5-minute talk. That's sometimes really a bit nerve or goes on your nerves. But on the other hand, we also got some really creative and innovative solutions to interact with the patients, to interact with the monitors. So that was a really, really good point. But I personally also miss the face-to-face contacts, because you get the feeling of the clinic, of the persons, which is always or makes it much more easier to work with them.
Yeah, and another thing I'll add to that is, we were used to having the comfort and the luxury of sort of manually working through something because we're going to IMs in person or training sites in person on technology. When, as soon as we didn't have that luxury, we had to actually think pretty closely about, well, what is the documentation and the materials and the resources that we provide to sponsors and sites on how to use the tech. That we were previously just kind of filling in the gaps through in-person conversations. Now we have to be a lot more intentional and robust with those kinds of communications because they have to be complete in the way that they're being done remotely or on paper. And so that's, I think, a good thing to be thinking actively about. Is the material that I provide to a sponsor or site to help execute a study complete on its own, or does it require some sort of manual work or conversations? It's nice to, on the other side of this, have thought through that and put that together a lot more intentionally.
Matej, if I pronounced it correctly, do you have
for
a view
me, it would be also important to keep the momentum and to capitalize on everything that was actually a step forward in this period, be it a technological advance or something else. Like, I don't know, remote monitoring, remote administration, remote visits, using of wearables, of other technologies to collect the data in a safe and secure way. But also, the speed that we have got in communication, interactions between industry stakeholders or regulators or with the health system, that also is changing. So all this, I think we need to keep them and then to capitalize.
No, very good point. Sam, I was going to start to encourage some of our audience to put some questions in, but they have to do that on the Q&A. I'm not quite sure how you pressurize the audience to ask questions, but maybe you can encourage them to fire some questions in, please. Sam, can you hear me? Maybe not. So hopefully somebody in the audience, can you put in some questions, please? So otherwise it's just us talking to ourselves, and we want to hear from you.
I also have a question for folks on the panel, if that's okay. I think we're all on the same page in terms of wanting to, as was just said, sort of keep the momentum up in terms of these sort of more flexible studies. How is that, at least on sponsor sides, being realized a bit more tangibly? Like, are there more sort of concerted efforts to try and involve digital tools and digital assessments in studies, or is it sort of still just conversation that we're trying to figure out how to concretize a little bit better? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just waiting for somebody to pick it up. Who wants to go first?
Maybe I can kick it off. In terms of safety, what we have noticed, it's an increase of the adoption of tools that will facilitate collection of the safety data. So as long as the patients were not able actually to go to the sites for visits and so on, then we have to put in place tools, apps, things that will help us to get the information from the patients to the sites or directly to the sponsor. And I think that's a good start now to encourage this direct contact of the patients with the sponsors in order to report information, especially related to the safety evolution. And then also we have seen an increased use of wearables that will serve us with information regarding that in absence of direct monitoring visit. Because, a phone call from the investigator, it can help a lot, but cannot replace an ECG or some glucose meter data that is coming directly from the patients via the tools, and is flying directly into the CRF eventually.
Very good. Any more comments on it? Because actually had a question that just popped up from Cheryl Caswell, but any more thoughts on the point that the question that Anzar raised?
I fully agree, and I would like also to say again about patient safety. So we make sure we capture the adverse events. We have a full, comprehensive set of data coming from safety. We don't miss anything because simply decentralizing, at any cost, all the studies. We can't do that. We need to have patients to the sites, talking to the doctors, and being visited, being checked, being monitored. And this is something that cannot exclusively done remotely. So we have to get a better balance, and obviously remotely is important nowadays for sure.
Very good. I just see we've got a question come in from Cheryl Caswell saying, have there been any differences between European and US regulators in their acceptance of tools for decentralized trials and or digital tools? So maybe Sebastian, if you kick off with that, because obviously you're in Europe, but you work for a US company. Have you seen any differences?
Right now, to be honest, I don't know. Because that's not the point or the point where I work with, but from my history. One moment.
We've got young groups already, so that's very good, very impressive. So.
Exactly. From my history, I know the European Agency for medical devices is pretty open to new digital tools, at least in the company I work with. Though, but there I didn't have the direct comparison to the FDA. So to be honest, I can't do a founded comparison there.
And so, Anzar, the other way around, you work for a European company that's based in the US. Do you see any differences?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know. We ultimately the direction and the intentions are the same across the pond, in that there needs to be pathways and processes through which both sponsors and drug developers can sort of make a case for certain digital tools to be used as either for safety or efficacy, and also efforts that we can make as vendors and providers of those measurements to try and demonstrate the reliability and the validity of the measurement tools. So on our side, the work that we conduct to demonstrate that kind of validity and reliability doesn't change, because for us, we still need to conduct the cognitive assessments in a population of patients, collect data, demonstrate their reliability and accuracy. And that's really a scientific process that's fairly universal despite, any kind of regulatory body. So in that sense, for us, it's not very different. But usually it's not us that's engaging with the regulator. It's usually actually the sponsor side that is doing that, or we're doing that in partnership with the sponsor. So, but thankfully the pandemic hasn't been long enough where we've deployed something and then gotten to that stage of using those tools. That is, I would say, COVID related. Of course, there's precedent in the past of having used these tools and taken them to regulators and having them been used as primary, secondary endpoints, but nothing that's sort of COVID specific, I would say.
Any other thoughts on the transatlantic difference?
I can say a few words about regulators. Unfortunately, we don't have any tools or digital platforms in our studies, but in the COVID situation, we were on both sides of Atlantic, in the United States and in Europe. And like I said, no information from regulators for digital tools, but what I can add to discussion is how regulators so for remote monitoring process, for instance, so once we had to switch from regular monitoring to remote monitoring, so we had all plans, but now we have to make them in practice. And then we had some challenges with regulators, of course, because first of all, we had to amend contracts with hospitals to allow us to enter electronic medical records with hospitals. And then also we had to let IRB know that we will be doing remote monitoring. So in IRB, the process was smooth, so no concerns from regulatory, but I can say that the process was time-consuming, especially because some of CROs must also have their access to EMRs, and this was a long process because they had to submit all kinds of documents like, valid licenses, certificates of not being penalized for any events. So, but the process was smooth. On the other hand, in Europe, the process of getting into electronic medical records was difficult because of GDPR, of course. In the United States, we have HIPAA Act. In Europe, we have GDPR, but on top of that, each country has their own regulations on accessing electronic medical records. And here we face some more challenges in Europe than in Europe to get remote monitoring established. So,
thank you very much. So, Danica, have you got any thoughts on that? Because you've obviously worked in, with the US and in the US as well as Europe. Have you seen any differences or comparisons that people? Danica, I was just asking.
Mark, I'm sorry, your voice is cutting in and out.
Sorry, I'll get closer to the. I'm probably sat too far back in my chair. Domenico, I was asking, have you seen any differences between the US and Europe in your recent work or historically in terms of digital platforms?
No, I know that both agencies are very keen on digital technology. So I know that they are very, very focused, very adamant to get, academies, private organizations, pharma, biotech to work in digital technology more and more. I haven't seen an harmonized document though, if you ask me. I haven't seen a document where all these agencies, in Japan, in US, in Europe, Canada, Australia, they've all combined, a kind of unified position. So it looks to me like, it's more even working at regional level. You have to apply working with your own agency. If you work in the US, you deal with the FDA, and you work in Europe, you deal with the MEA and whatever. So I think the harmonization still has to come into place. But that it doesn't apply only for digital technology. It applies throughout. Because I've explained earlier during my speech that, for instance, in fibromyalgia, the assessments were different. So there are 3 drugs approved in the US, none approved in Europe, 2 approved in Canada, 2 approved in Japan. So there's a total inconsistency in the way the agencies, release their guidances, in the way the agencies, they judge and assess the drugs with the same data. So I think it's a lot of work that needs to be done at that level also to get more harmonized. And I think it's something that is part of this journey we're talking about. So it's part of the work we do. We need to try somehow, be with a consortium, but somehow the way to liaise with all the agencies at the same time and making sure that our job becomes a little bit easier, because otherwise it's very complicated already.
Understood. Very helpful. So, Michelle, do you have any comments in terms of the safety side, in terms of US versus Europe?
Yeah, I think what we have seen is that US, it's a little bit faster in certain direction, and I will give the example, for example, combination products and investigation on that. They have a larger focus on the artificial intelligence applied in clinical trials or apply in the health field, while they are focusing on practical aspects of implementation and use of the artificial intelligence. While the European, for example, in that field, they are more focusing on philosophical aspects, on ethics aspects, or how how to build a trustworthy AI. I think that's the title of one of the documents that they issued in the recent couple of years. So there is a difference in terms of how they approach this digital progress and digitalization of the world. But on the other hand, you see in Europe a larger concentration of forces into data protection. And in US is rather a focus on data security. So these are differences which might be subtle at a certain point, but will lead to eventually different approach when you design a study there, and what you can use and what you should rather not use into these areas.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's some good points. I think one thing you raised there as well was combination products. And one of the things I think we're seeing, particularly with the vaccines themselves, is combination products or mix and match on vaccines. Now, you can see from a biological perspective, if you've got different, you're going to get a broader spectrum immunity if you have more than one vaccine. So we're seeing it there, but I think also people are throwing, all sorts of interesting compounds at COVID and other indications, other chronic indications. I mean, obviously, when I worked in pharma, it was always very competitive, Pfizer versus Merck or whoever it was. Can this herald in a new area of cooperation where, or am I just being really naive and that will never happen? What are the panel's thoughts?
Yeah, I was mentioning about the consortium. I was mentioning about kind of consortium type approach in order to minimize, the spending, minimize or reduce the cutting a little bit the costing of our programs and becoming louder, stronger as a private group of companies, because what we have always done is to work separately. There've been some examples of actually quite important of working together, which can be actually very effective because can have more pressure on agencies, can have a more synchronization with patients groups, and they don't perceive that we are a bunch of different entities who deal with them separately. I mean, it would be so much better if we could work together for tackling could be therapeutic disease specific, at least. It could be linked to, you mentioned vaccines, could be linked to a kind of group of particular projects, but where actually our strengths can be all combined and we can be more effective at the end. I would imagine this kind of consortium approach to be the way to proceed in the future for many things.
Do the others agree, or is that too idealistic, do you think?
I agree absolutely. And beside the scientific aspect, it's also that the physicians, when I'm talking to them, they also had the wish that why can't the pharma companies have one big event? Do we really need one for Novartis, one for Lilly, one for Merck? Just make one big event. It will save us time. We've got the same gain of knowledge, and they're really, I will not say pushing because they know how the business is working, but they would be happy if the pharma companies work a bit more together, even when it comes down to marketing or stuff like that.
I would say time constraints now is a particular sensitive issue. Time is very limited. They always had very little time. Patients have always had, little time, and they made great efforts to go to the hospitals, to go and see their doctors, GPs. Now time is an issue. There's no time for all what we used to do, they used to do in the past. This is why we need to become more time effective. So, and more time in effective initiatives. It has to be the future. It will be the future of what happens. Regarding this pandemic, there will be other constraints, other challenges. We need to become more time effective and time cost effective overall.
Other thoughts on this issue, Dennis? For example, are we all being idealistic? Do you want to give us a more realistic point of view, or are you going with all of us guys?
No, I have to say it seems like too idealistic for me, because I was working, in pharma and in all of these CROs, and we had a lot of customers from all pharma sector, and I'm not sure. I think that the money is the main driver. I know I'm also medical background, and I would like to see it happen, but I still see money as a primary interest in pharma companies, and I don't see how this can happen. Maybe there can be some small steps, and I understand the physicians and all other parties which are looking to save time and to not to go to so many events happening, the congresses organized by many pharma companies, or even products to be maybe. Why do we have so many medications which are similar in effect? It seems too idealistic for me at the moment.
Yeah. But to be honest with you, it's like the pandemic is teaching us that the small, medium-sized businesses are disappearing. They don't have the capacity to survive because they find. So it's not idealistic thinking that the small, medium businesses, small, medium-sized organizations could promote a very realistic plan or initiative to make sure that they survive, because the pandemic is killing an awful lot of businesses. And it's real. So it happens in the market, it happens in shops, in chains, it happens in the pharma, in small biotech won't survive. So there is a need, there's a real need, tangible need to reorganize the way we do. And I would imagine if there are big companies that don't want to get involved, that's fine, so be it, because they got plenty of money and big muscle. But lots of businesses are affected by this pandemic, and will be other challenges affecting them. It's in the interest of many of us to make sure that is not idealistic, but becomes realistic. That's what I think. I think it's the way we can all survive in this business.
So, Anzar, do you think the Cambridge Cognition platform can bring big pharma together, and that's your ultimate mission, or are we being even more idealistic and naive? Right?
I can only really speak on the side of things that we can control and have some level of power over. I think we're just focused on making sure that the assessments that we build and deploy are robust and reliable and trusted, and that helps us ultimately get them deployed in studies. I think to try and expand this kind of deployment of digital tools in general, we need to think about interoperability. This is what I'd spoken about earlier this morning, to try and be not so sort of narrowly focused on how our platform works within itself as an end-to-end solution in clinical research, rather how it works well with every other moving part of a clinical study. Not to mention every other moving part that comes with other vendors that are going to be performing their duties in clinical studies. So, I don't know the answer, the question. This is, I don't think I can add anything beyond what others have already said, but certainly there are good and bad takeaways from the last couple of years, and we're sort of focused on trying to build the tech best to be able to do what it needs to do without adding an additional burden or complexity in the study, improving the patient experience, and very importantly, providing a sensitive and objective and scalable metric of patient health and behavior within and outside of the clinic.
Very good. But what about from the safety side? Because I can say, maybe one of Pfizer's great gifts to the world was developing the Fetolite, which turned out to be a hERG blocker, which we didn't know at the time, and now everyone has adopted that as a standard regulatory process. So maybe safety is the place to start, right? When we're trying to share safety data, because bigger data sets allow us to make more informed decisions.
Yeah, you are right, and I think the direction that we are heading here is actually to try to collect more information from real-world data settings. And you see clearly a tendency of the authorities to look at sort of a class effect. So if something that they have observed with one compound, then they transport it easily to the other compounds. And that harmonization is not always for the better or in the best interest of patients. And personalized medicine and personalized safety, it's the other way around that we are heading now. We need to collect enough data to be able to give to the prescribing physician enough armamentarium to say, okay, this is quantified as a risk in that way, and this is applicable or not applicable to my patient, the patient which is in front of me, because at the end of the day, it's about that particular patient and each and every patient. So that's also ensuring that we are staying and advancing on this patient centricity that it's all about nowadays in the clinical trials. Another aspect that I think deserve a larger discussion. It's the expansion of the advanced therapies, be it a gene therapy or CRISPR or whatever. Now the digital therapeutics are emerging as a new type of treatments, and I would like to see and to learn how to do safety for it, because it's one to do safety for a small molecule or for a biologic or even for a combination product, but to do it for an app that is treating depression, that will be, I think, very interesting to follow up in the next years.
Yes, and I think you raise a very good point for an app, right? I mean, some of the fears or the for artificial intelligence is, can the decision making be taken away from the physician and given to a machine? We know machines can't, actually file patents, right? Because they're not intelligent. Do you ever foresee a day or a danger when the machines are taking the physician's decision-making power away? And I'm waiting for a torrent of abuse from the physicians on this call. But what do people think?
Yeah, as a physician, I cannot agree with that a machine will take a human place. I think machines are still far from dictating all those nuances. As a hiring manager in safety, I always chase the physicians that they have the good PV, the good pharmacovigilance or safety instincts. You read a case and you know that you are sitting on a signal. You don't need to look at statistics or numbers to pick up a signal. It's just to reading through the case. I think that's what is making the humans irreplaceable on this. Yeah. But yes, artificial intelligence has the advantage that will help us to screen large data sets. And indeed, what could be the best field to apply artificial intelligence will be signal detection, because they should be able to see patterns faster and easier than a human brain can do it. So that's what I'm expecting for the artificial intelligence to help in the future.
Yeah, and as a non-physician, I'll say, as a non-physician who's trying to develop technologies for clinical decision-making, the goal really is not to replace that and take that away from physicians. It's really to help make more informed decisions with the power that comes with data analysis from large sort of data sets. There are holes in the healthcare system, particularly here, where we don't have a window into patient health and behavior outside of the clinic. And if technologies can be deployed that provide that visibility into patient health and behavior, it can be a good tool to have access to make sort of more informed decisions in clinical care. And that's really the goal. And something that's sort of, particularly in mental health at least, or neurological neuropsychiatric disorders, if I break my leg, I can get an X-ray. If I have an infection, I can get a lab done. But there's no such thing as a blood test for depression or neuropsychiatric disorder. The objectivity in those kinds of assessments doesn't exist, and a lot of the digital tools are allowing for sort of objective quantification of behavior. And if we do that with a level of validity and reliability and accuracy, and we're able to merge data that is collected from different sets of tools that are leading to large multimodal data sets of quantified patient behavior that's been quantified digitally, there is a potential for, to some extent, unprecedented machine learning-based models that are able to predict patient health and behavior in very actionable ways, to try and predict whether a patient is going to have a treatment failure or rehospitalization at some point in the future, or whether they need or are not responding to some kind of treatment. There's definitely value to these tools to help in clinical decision-making, but that's by no means suggesting that the decision is in the hands of the machine rather than the physician.
Great. So our jobs are safe. That's a reassuring point to start to draw to a close, because I think we're meant to finish in a few more minutes. Sam, is there anything else that we should cover that we haven't covered, or any points that the panel members want to make in the last few minutes?
I guess everyone's final thoughts, if they want to summarize it in like 20.
Sure, just let me go down the panel and summarize what you think we've learned, and then I'll try and do something at the very, very end.
Is that for me, Mark? I couldn't hear you. You broke up. So it's okay. So I can start. So basically, I would like to emphasize the patient focus. So is the pandemic has given us the opportunity to really keep focused and not derail our attention on patients. So make sure that they become at the core of our designs. We make more meaningful clinical study designs. We can continue our clinical study protocol with patients, and we can make the designs more affordable. I made examples of reducing number of visits, for instance, or numbers of testing, and using digital technology. Absolutely welcome, and continue and thinking about how we can combine our strengths all together in order to improve the level of quality and affordability of our clinical programs.
Excellent. And Dennis, do you want to make a few final thoughts, and we'll just go through the panel and then draw everything to a close?
Sure, and I can already agree with Nico. So what we have realized that protocols, study designs, there must be a change, and you have to apply the knowledge that we learned so far, because many of protocol assessments on tests could not have been performed during COVID. So we have to know it for future, or to allow exemptions and to include it in our statistical analysis, or not to have it. You have to see what is the essential test, what is the essential procedure. Does patient really have to go, or can patient go to a general practice for some assessment? So this is first thing. Second thing is vendors. Having fully outsourcing strategy for clinical trials, you also have to ask vendors the same questions. Are you capable, and what are your actual mitigation plans and backup plans if something happens? Can you perform? Can you switch to remote monitoring model just when there is a need? Third part is also vendors considering labs. We were also facing many situations where supply chains were broken, not only for transport, but only for logistics and manufacturing. So you have to have many vendors in your pocket to know which one to use if necessary. You have to ask them, have you bought your supplies in advance? What will be your plans if there is a lockdown? How will you produce, lab kits? How will you get samples? And so you must ask also yourself these questions and apply appropriate plans, but also your vendors and all of your partners.
Very good. Thank you. Sebastian, you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, as Domenico especially mentioned, I think the pandemic, besides all the bad effects, gave the companies and everybody of us some time to rethink the strategies we have. Is it really necessary to do it like we've done it before, or can't we have new ideas, new solutions? So from this point, I think that's a good point. And as Dennis mentioned, I think, or I hope, we are now prepared for a case like this, or at least a bit. And then, I hope it will not affect us as much as the last times, especially from the patient's view, that they are getting the treatment they needed in the time they needed, and not have a long follow-up for the treatment.
Very good. So have you got one more final thought, and then hands over?
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate what Sebastian has started to say. I think we need really to look a little bit back to learn our lessons, to see what we have done well, what we have done new and different, and then what is the added value of that, and we should keep that, or we should just document it in the business continuity plan and to use it again if that will be needed. But I think there were so many things that were put in place in the way that we are doing clinical trials. There were new designs, new options that we have for monitoring, for performing. The supply chain was mentioned also. So all these new things should be evaluated, and we should keep whatever was good or was proven to be increasing our efficiency or our speed, because at the end of the day, that's we are aiming to do more with less.
Excellent. Very well summarized. Anzar, just a few more words at the end, and we can wrap up.
Yeah, no, first of all, thanks for having and leading the discussion, Mark. Just talking about clinical outsourcing and decentralized trials, I think, as a vendor, we want to play a role where we're helping enable that from enabling in digital trials in general. And so for us, it's just a matter of focusing on the tech and making sure that the underlying science is robust and well validated, and that we're intentional about how we're also building product and software to best fit into the way in which these studies are run. And for this kind of adoption of certain tools to not just be motivated by studies having to be decentralized or remote, but also recognizing sort of the clinical scientific benefits of having some of these assessments be digital is not just that they can be done remotely or at any time, but that they can actually also provide really sensitive and accurate metrics that at times are not as easily acquired through traditional subjective observation. But thank you, and it's been really lovely chatting.
Thank you, everybody. And Sam, do we just disconnect now, or is there anything more you want to say at the end? Obviously, we're all back tomorrow, but maybe you want to say a few last words.